I'm very honored to be able to present to you Essie. Is it Sacker? Sacker Hill?
Shachar. Shachar.
Shachar Hill. Okay. And Essie is a social worker in the Chicago area, but she grew up in central Michigan and went to Michigan undergraduate and got her master's degree there. And she told me that she was in the Avoda program that some of you may know about. That's a service program for like post-college folks. Our Sari Kreines was in the Avoda program a few years ago, and that's what took her to the Chicago area. And it turns out, we just discovered that she works for the same social service agency that my daughter Abby works for. So
Oh,
how
wow.
crazy is
Oh,
that?
neat.
And they like started the same day. So as soon as I'm done here, I have to pop on and tell Abby that. So she specializes in her social work with LGBTQ adolescents. We're really delighted that she's able to come tonight at the, under the auspices of Keshet, which is a Jewish LGBTQ education and advocacy organization. And
Hmm.
this program tonight is sponsored by the Ritual Committee that has been grappling with some questions of a ritual nature of how to be more inclusive and welcoming and give a feeling of belonging to those within our community who are in the various identities of LGBTQIA plus. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Essie, and thank you so much for being with us this evening. And maybe if folks could mute themselves until there's time for interaction, and then you can open up your mics.
Thank you so much. It's really lovely to be with you all. As Rabbi said, my name is Essie Shachar Hill. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. So actually, when you talk about me, it'll sound like this person called in from Chicago and they had short hair and they work with the rabbi's daughter at Youth Services in Chicago. So we're going to talk more about pronouns later today, but just a heads up, that is how you can respectfully refer to me. I'd love if folks can make sure that you are sort of on Zoom named the way that you would like to be called. Since I don't know you all, I want to make sure that I'm referring to you in the ways that you want to be called. So if you can make sure your first name is on there, and if you would like to include pronouns, you can. If you're like, what the heck are you talking about, Essie? Don't worry, we're going to talk about it later, and you will know what I'm talking about by the end of this evening. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to ignore the folks coming into the waiting room, and I'm going to leave that to the rabbi to let folks in. And I'm going to start sharing my screen. All right. So as we're getting going today, feel free to use the chat if things are coming up for you. I will also periodically pause and take space for questions if you want to use the chat then, or also come off mute and use your beautiful voice. There will be plenty of time for that kind of interaction as well. So I am here this evening, or here in this virtual, beautiful Zoom room, talking about LGBTQ equality and belonging in Jewish communities. I'm here as a contract trainer with the organization called Keshet. Keshet is a national organization that works for LGBTQ equality and belonging in Jewish life. Keshet works towards that mission by having some fabulous teen programming. They run really wonderful and meaningful Shabbatonim for LGBTQ plus Jewish young people throughout the year. Keshet also has an advocacy department that works on campaigns and sort of political organizing. And Keshet also has an education program, which is sort of how I'm here speaking with you all. We go into organizations like synagogues and JCCs and Jewish day schools, and really any Jewish organization that wants to work with us to learn about becoming a more inclusive space. So our goals for this evening are to make sure that by the time we leave, you're able to identify and understand the core terms and concepts related to LGBTQ identities, to start to think about LGBTQ equality in a broader DEI framework. So DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll definitely be making connections between LGBTQ equality and Jewish values. That's what Keshet is all about. And finally, starting to identify a framework for moving toward LGBTQ equality and belonging in your community. So these are our lofty goals for the next 90-ish minutes together. Before we jump in, I always start with some kavanot, some intentions, some ground rules, some group agreements, whatever you like to call these, so that you all can know what you can expect from me, what I know what to expect from you, what you all can expect from each other. Again, I'm new to this community. You all have a community there by yourself, and I'm new to this. So I always like to make sure we're on the same page around what we can expect from each other. So the first kavana is growth and learning mindset. So we're all here to learn. We're all here to grow and to learn. That is sort of my working assumption. That means that sometimes people might make mistakes, right? And that's fine. That's what this space is for. So this really is a place where you can ask questions that you might feel a little nervous to ask. You can make mistakes. That's okay. That's really what this space is about, for a learning and growth mindset. The next kavana is what we call take space, make space. So think about how much space you're taking up in the conversation. If you find yourself sort of raising your hand every 2 minutes with something to add,
1:30.
I will maybe
We're up to
ask,
1:30.
Oh, thank you.
Almost.
I will maybe ask for folks
Want me
to
to bring it in here?
Thank you. All right, we've got some mute magic happening. So take space, make space is just about monitoring how much space you're taking up in a conversation. If you're feeling a little shy, maybe push yourself to take up a little more space. If you're finding yourself chiming in quite a bit, maybe reel it in a little bit to make sure everyone has the opportunity to be heard. We say take lessons and leave stories. So this is the piece about confidentiality. So if you learn something tonight, and I really hope you learn something, please take that lesson outside of this space, teach it to other people, talk about it with your friends. That's fabulous. If others in this space share stories or personal anecdotes or personal information, leave those specifics here. I also do want to note that we are recording. So please be aware of that when you're choosing what to share, that this is being recorded and is going to be available to other Beth Hillel members. So keep that in mind as well. We say trust intent and tend impact. So what that means is assuming best intentions, right? I'm assuming that you all here are here to learn and to work towards having an even better community. Those are the beautiful intentions, and I'm assuming folks are coming in with. And sometimes the words we use might land a little differently than how we mean them to. So going back to that point of sort of making mistakes and asking questions, you might make a mistake in this space, and that's okay, but there's a possibility that might hurt someone. So I will ask for folks to consent to be lovingly corrected. So if you do ask a question or you're sort of stumbling with your words, I might step in to help you find those words or suggest alternate ways of asking a question, just to be mindful of the ways that our words have power. We also say prepare for non-closure. So right up top, I'm telling you, not every single question is going to get answered. We are not all going to walk away as experts on this topic. That's really not the intention. So I just want to prepare you for non-closure right up front. We're going to scratch the surface in an hour and a half, but you may not feel completely fulfilled or like you have every answer at the end, and that's okay, because again, we're always growing as humans and always learning. Stay present as much as possible. So do what you need to do. We're all adults here. If you need to close the dog out of the room, if you need to turn your ringer on to silent, that's great. And I also know that folks have responsibilities and you may need to step away. You may need to take your camera off to go fix yourself some dinner. That's of course fully welcome, and I will trust that folks are participating as much as they're able. And finally, have fun. So as you may be already able to tell from my energy, I think this stuff is fun. I think learning is fun and teaching is fun. So not everything is going to be doom and gloom. You can laugh at my corny jokes and have a little bit of fun this evening. So those are sort of the kavanah that I am bringing in. I'll give it a moment if anyone has questions on any of those or any other kavanot or ground rules that you would like to bring in that feel important for this space. If you do, feel free to use the chat or come off mute. All righty, hearing none and seeing none, I'm going to assume that these are good to go and we'll keep moving. All right. So before we get into some terms and concepts, we want to think kind of big picture about the why. Why am I here talking about this? Why is this an important topic that Beth Hillel wanted to learn about? Why are you all here this evening? So I want you to think about a moment when you were able to be in a communal setting, some organization, some community, as your full self. A time when you didn't have to check any part of your identity at the door. You really felt welcomed as your full, whole self. So take a moment and think about a time when you may have felt that sense of belonging in a community for yourself. And I want to know, what did it feel like? How did you know that you were able to bring yourself, your full self? Did you interact differently when you were able to be your full self? How and why? So at this point, let's see, do we have breakout rooms enabled? We do. All right, we have 17 folks here. That's amazing. I'm gonna put folks into some breakout rooms for just about 6-7-ish minutes. So each person will have 2 or 3 minutes to share and think about this experience, a time when you were able to be in a community with your full self. How did you feel? How did you know you could bring your full self? So just start thinking to yourself about what you might want to share as I create these breakout rooms. I'm wondering if Eileen Anderson and Eileen's iPad are the same person. Could someone let me know if that's true?
Two different Eileens.
They're different. Great.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. I am just about ready to send you to your rooms. Okay. You will have 7 minutes. I'll bring you back at that time.
Hi.
Hi, why am I little and you're big?
Are you on a computer or on a
Through
phone?
gallery, there we go. But
Yeah.
still, now you're little and I'm big, but it's because you're on a phone.
Maybe, yeah. Could be.
I think they're just gonna be
So
us.
maybe. So I think, the obvious is at Temple, of course, I feel to be my full self, but I'll give another example, which is at Gateway, when I decided to do the sessions on Judaism as part of an employee learning day. And I was in front of my colleagues and my coworkers, but in the role of explaining about Judaism. That was really interesting. A few people knew I was Jewish, but then it was really sort of putting that out there in a more public way, I guess. And yeah, it was interesting. At first, I guess it felt a little scary, but then it was good.
So in other words, since you did that, do you feel more safer at Gateway to be your full self all the time?
Yeah, I think so. I think before that I had spoken to certain people, but it was I felt like a squeaky wheel because I would be complaining, oh, really? It wouldn't be the best idea to schedule employee learning day for 400 people on Yom Kippur. Thank you very much, and trying to explain why, no, I didn't want to be on the committee for planning it this year because I can't go, and it was just that kind of a thing where I couldn't do something. And so then I guess it just felt more opened up. It was a more fuller understanding of that part of my identity. It wasn't just this little thing that I was complaining about or something.
Well, I thought of an example that was really from my past, but growing up in Janesville, I often didn't show my full self. or I didn't think people understood my full self. And I think for me, going to Jewish youth group, which was at the time BBYO, it was like the best thing that ever happened to me. It was like, this is my place. This is where people understand me. They have the same experiences. I don't have to explain myself all the time, you know. I really felt like my full self, and it was just, you know, it was the place I always wanted to be, you know, even if there was some other conflicting activity on a weekend. We had 3 weekends a year that we would get together in the region, and also in the summer. It didn't matter what was going on at high school, no matter how compelling or exciting it was. I wanted to be at the BBYO conclave because that was where I could be my full self.
Yeah. Sure. See, interestingly, I had kind of an opposite experience in my younger years because I grew up in New Jersey, where there's comparatively a lot of Jewish people, right? More than one synagogue to choose from and things like this. And there was definitely a different vibe of the Jewish kids or the Jewish clique and whatnot. And I wanted nothing to do with that whatsoever. It was very materialistic. It was very showy. It was just, maybe it was more of a class thing. I don't know. But I did not want to be associated with that. So it took me a longer time into my 20s is when I had ended up having my adult bar mitzvah to find Jews that I felt like were my people. You know what I mean? I really wanted to distance myself from a lot of the Jewish people that I grew up with. I do have one girlfriend, one good friend who is Jewish from the time of high school, but middle school we met, but only one. You know, all the way back from that time. And I didn't want anything to do with the Jewish youth group movements and all of that. I was just trying to get away from that stereotype. You know, you've probably heard the term Jap, you know, that type of thing, the Jewish American princess type thing. I just, I didn't want anything to do with that.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, our BBYO was from Kenosha, Racine, Janesville, Madison, and Beloit. And we were, you know, some of the Madison kids had a little bit of that piece, but mainly the kids who were in BBYO did not.
Yeah.
But we met up with them in Milwaukee. And when we'd have regional conventions in Milwaukee, and we always felt kind of, first of all, it was like Milwaukee, it didn't even know that other communities existed.
Right.
When we would come, it was like we were the poor stepchildren kind of thing. So, and also I encountered the kind of folks you're talking about for sure in Madison. Yeah. When I went to school in Madison, and it was, you know, I know exactly what you're talking about. So
So I mean, it was just really that
it probably worked out okay for you.
No, and that's what's so interesting. Like my kids growing up in a community where we're much fewer Jews here, right? But I feel in a way their Jewish identity is bigger earlier on, you know, because every Jewish person that they know, like they consider them part of their family, basically, you know, because my parents weren't here until 6 years ago, right?
Right.
So all of those people accompanied them through all of their milestones of their life, Jewish and otherwise, you know. Right. And so they almost feel like every Jewish person they meet, wherever they are, is like part of their family because of that, you know.
That's cool.
It's really different. Yeah. All right, we'll see you back.
Break out. Yeah, break out of the
breakout. We're gonna go.
Welcome back. Some folks are taking their last 30 seconds in their rooms. All right, they've got 10 more seconds and then everyone will be sucked back into the main room.
I ended up leaving my room by mistake, hitting my pad. And
oh no. Oh
so
no.
I don't want the other Eileen to feel that I was running away.
Oh gosh. Okay. We had someone abandoned. That's all right. We're gonna
Yes, I'm
debrief.
sorry.
That's okay.
That's the problem with technology. Oh,
It
there's
is.
Eileen. Sorry, I touched the screen by mistake and ran away.
It wasn't
okay.
personal, Eileen. It was not personal.
Okay, well, I just wanted you to know that.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that there was some good conversation. I'm curious if we can hear from a couple people about what did you talk about? What was the sort of moment that you shared?
Hi,
Anyone?
this is Deborah.
Great. Hi, Deborah. Thanks.
So Rabbi and I shared different things about experiences in Jewish youth groups. Rabbi's was very positive and very uplifting and very affirming, but mine was not. I just think it's so interesting, like the same kind of experience, depending on sort of the context and the time and everything that goes around it, you know, can really influence it. And then my own children. So I grew up in New Jersey, where there's a lot of Jews and choices about synagogues and all this, but I didn't identify with the people in the youth group kind of thing. And then my kids grew up here in Kenosha, where we're very few Jewish people. And I feel like their Jewish identity is even stronger at an earlier age.
Thanks for sharing, Deborah. Yeah, so something that really stood out to me is that two people can have very different experiences in the same or similar contexts or spaces. It could be really empowering and wonderful for one person and really not so comfortable for another person, depending on sort of identities and experiences and the way that that space is set up. Thank you so much for sharing.
Hi, it's Bunny, and I was with Ben. Come on, Ben. Ben and I have connected the minute we met how many years ago, so it was kind of fun, you know. But we both figured out when we became us, you know, ourselves, and that was very interesting. You know, yeah.
And Bunny, can you say more about like when you became yourselves? Was that related to some community or some sense of belonging?
I think when I went away to college, and I went to a private junior college, and I found out that I was really kind of a cool person, and that I became president of the girls club and stuff like that. And that was the beginning. But then I really, for me, became myself in PTA. And I mean, that was really, wow, I'm a cool person and people really, really like me, and I can do things and I can volunteer. And, you know, I got into it because nobody was going to take my miracle baby away from me for a whole day, because she was the first all-day kindergarten. But it was great. I mean, I found out that I'm really a nice person and I can do things and I can be organized and stuff like that. And that was really the beginning of me.
Thanks, Bunny. So, thank you for sharing that. That's really beautiful. So I'm hearing this. There's like, when there's opportunity for people to have, maybe in your case, a leadership role, or those different opportunities can really allow folks to come into themselves, and sort of having reflected back from other people that we like you, you're a cool person, people kind of seeing you for who you are was really give you sort of a felt sense that like, oh yeah, this is me. Thank you for sharing. We have time maybe for if one more person wants to share what they talked about, this sense of belonging in a community.
Hi, my name's Melanie. It's not Jake. I'm using my boyfriend's computer and I can't change my name for some reason.
I'm gonna rename you.
Which is ironic in some way. But I was talking with Dorothy and we briefly talked about like, you know, pronouns and everything regarding that. I'm a trans woman. I am here. Rabbi Feingold suggested I show up. Thank you, Rabbi. I think I realized that I was trans myself when I was around 18, but I think I always kind of had sort of an idea of it, you know, all throughout my life. And I think one area that I was able to really sort of be myself in was these communal convention spaces that I've been going to ever since, like, I think the beginning of high school. Sort of big anime conventions, you know, fandom conventions that have really kind of shown me like there's a lot of different sort of people in the world, and it's allowed me to be myself in those spaces that it just felt really great. And the more that I was in those spaces, the more I feel like, and with my boyfriend, the more I realized that I wasn't the person that I thought I was, and I was able to be a person that made me happier.
Thank you, Melanie. That's so beautiful. I renamed you just so that, oh, there you go. You renamed yourself and you got the spelling right. Okay. Or somebody renamed you and got the spelling right. I'm so glad you're here, Melanie. Thank you for sharing that. Something that really stood out to me was being in spaces where there were lots of different kinds of people there, and something about seeing yourself reflected in other people and seeing people who are different from you and similar, and kind of having a sense of like, oh my gosh, look at all these options of the kinds of people that walk this earth, or that are inhabit this earth, excuse me. And that being a really sort of I can connect with that sense of it being like a mind-blowing experience of like, wow, I have so many more options than maybe I thought I did. So thank you all so much for sharing. So the reason that we start with this, if it's not sort of obvious, is because today we're talking about that sense of belonging in communal settings. We're talking about specifically in your Jewish community, how to be more affirming and make it a space where LGBTQ folks feel like they belong, where they feel like they don't have to check part of their identity at the door, where we can come into a space and feel like we are seen and honored for who we are. So as we're going through the rest of the presentation, have kind of in the back of your mind that felt sense that maybe you talked about with your partner of what it felt like to belong, because that's a really powerful connection that we're going to be talking about today. All right, so moving into what I call LGBTQ alphabets, we're going to do some terms and concepts. So we're going to be talking about what all those letters mean, some core terms. And we're going to get into that in just a minute. But before we do, I would love to have a sense of who's in the room, because I don't really know what your level of exposure on these topics is. I don't know what communities you're part of, what the conversations you're having are. And so if you want to think to yourself in terms of LGBTQ things, terms, concepts, conversations, on a scale of 1 to 5, where are you? 1 being like, I'm brand new to this. Like, I am a beginner. I'm a little seed. That's what this picture is. Like, I'm a little seed. I'm at the beginning of my life journey around LGBTQ things. That would be a 1. And a 5 would be like, I'm a mature tree. Like, I know all the things about LGBTQ plus. Like, I'm even teaching other people about LGBTQ. So think to yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being a beginner and 5 being like quite advanced. What are you? 1, 2, 3, or 5. And if you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you can put that number in the chat, that would be super helpful for me to know sort of who I'm talking to. So 1 through 5, 1 being a beginner, 5 being advanced. Okay, great. Okay, thank you for those who have responded. I'm seeing 2, 3, 3, 4, 3, 5, 3. Okay. Oh, great. Okay. Oh, these are all coming as, okay. Most people are direct messaging me. That's fun. Okay. So it seems like we have a couple advanced folks and lots of folks kind of in the middle. Great. Okay. Okay, great. Great, great, great. Oh, I love that we've got some decimal points. Great, thank you, everybody. Really helpful for me to know kind of who I'm talking to, so that I can aim this at the right level. All right. So to just start off, I want to start with this idea of a binary. So bi means 2, right? So binary is things that are, there's 2 and only 2. And they're usually seen as opposite. So binary things are usually opposites. They're mutually exclusive. It's like one or the other. You can't be both. There's 2 and only 2. So for example, one binary might be night and day. Okay, that's an example of a binary. What other binaries do you know of? Can folks put in the chat or say aloud? So just in the world, some binaries that you know of, some systems that are sort of 2 and only 2 opposites.
Male and female.
Okay, male and female is a binary, sure. What else?
Democrat and Republican.
Great, Democrat, Republican, great. I got a private message day and night. Perfect. What else? These are great.
Chocolate and vanilla.
Chocolate and vanilla. Great. Great. Any other ideas? Up and down. Great. Yes, up and down. Great. These are great examples. One of my personal favorites, cat person or dog person, right? Coffee person or tea person. Great. So I think we understand the idea of binaries because those are all super appropriate examples. We as humans are always taking in so much information. When we move through the world, we're taking in so many stimuli, so much information all the time that our brain starts to categorize things often in simpler terms. And often that turns out to be sort of binary terms, right? Because sometimes it's so overwhelming to hold all the complexity that our brain simplifies things. And this is totally natural. This is like a very human thing to simplify things into categories. But it's flattening in some ways, and we lose complexity, right? When we say a cat person or a dog person, what does that mean? Does that mean that if I'm a cat person, which I do identify as a cat person, I'm never going to pet a dog and I hate dogs and I'm going to run away anytime I see a dog? No, right? I maybe have cats and I would prefer to have cats in my home, but I love a good snuggle with a dog, right? When we say Democrat and Republican, you know, I know folks who feel like those are really not encompassing of their whole experience and their whole ideology. And maybe on a form, they need to, like, on a ballot, even like check one box or the other, but that word doesn't actually fully encapsulate everything about them. So we're going to be talking about some things today related to gender and sexuality that many of us were raised to think of as a binary, of there being only two options. But I want to invite this idea that actually the world is more complex and human experience is certainly more complex than having only two options. So that's a little bit of a frame around the binary. And we're going to do some challenging of different binaries just about in a moment. All right, I know I'm giving a lot of caveats before I sort of get to, like, what does the L mean? What does the G mean? But it feels important to give some thoughtful framing here. And I want to bring in this piece also, that context matters. And today we're going to be talking largely about gender identity and sexual orientation. But we all have so many more identities than just that, right? Up on the screen, we have some examples: race, education, sexuality, ability, age, gender, ethnicity, culture, language, class, and there's even more than that. So humans, again, have very complex experiences, have many, many different intersecting identities, and those identities impact each other. So, you know, for example, a gay white man is going to have a different experience in the world than a Black queer woman, right? So even though they might both be part of the LGBTQ community, those other identities really impact that experience. And we cannot really take people out of that context, and folks don't exist in a vacuum. So I want to also remind us of that. All right, now we're going to dive into it. We're going to be talking about three axes of identity this evening. At the top, sex assigned at birth, that's one axis. We're also going to be talking about gender identity and sexual orientation. The reason that we start with this triangle with not a lot of detail is just to remind folks that these are three different categories. So sex assigned at birth is distinct from gender identity, is distinct from sexual orientation. Out in the media, in the mainstream, these three categories are often conflated, which makes things really confusing. So I just want to start off by separating these three things out. And while they have relationships to each other, these are three different categories. So we're going to start up at the top. When we're talking about sex assigned at birth, we're talking about, someone's in the waiting room. We're talking about when a little human baby is born in this society, the doctor or the doula or the midwife delivers that baby, looks between that baby's legs and says, "Congratulations, it's a," insert sex here. Sex assigned at birth is often based on physical characteristics, things based in the body. So things like genitals, things like chromosomes, things like hormone levels, those things that you might read about sort of in a biology textbook. That's what we're talking about with sex assigned at birth. So the words up here fall under the category of sex assigned at birth. We have male, we have female, and we have intersex. So intersex is one that folks sometimes have questions about. Intersex describes someone whose characteristics cannot fit nicely into what we think of as male or female. So that can look a lot of different ways. That might look like someone who has a different chromosomal makeup other than XX or XY. It might look like someone with sort of different hormone levels than what's expected. It might look like someone who has external genitalia that quote unquote doesn't match or is not expected given their internal organs. So there's lots of different ways that intersex conditions can look. Some folks are recognized as intersex at birth, and some folks don't know that they're intersex until later in life, maybe around puberty when some bodily changes start to happen. Intersex conditions are as common as being born with red hair. So it's more common than folks might think. But if you think about how many redheads you know, that might be how many intersex folks you know as well. So it feels important to bring that in, and just to remember that even sort of biology is also not binary, right? There's more than even just male and female. We have this other category as well. So again, sex assigned at birth is very much about the body, bodily characteristics, the label that is put on a human when they're born. Gender identity is one's internal sense of who you are in terms of your gender. Gender identity is one's internal sense of who you are in terms of your gender. So in your heart, in your gut, in your kishkas, who do you know yourself to be? For some people, that might be man. For some people, that might be woman. We have some other terms up here like non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid. These are some, and not all, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some gender identities, one's internal sense of who they are. So my sort of silly, but I think telling definition of woman is someone who identifies as a woman. And I know that's not super helpful, but it's really the only definition I can give you that I feel good about, because to be a woman, you don't have to be yay tall. You don't have to have long hair. You don't have to have your voice be a certain way. You don't even have to have certain body parts, right? A woman is someone who knows herself to be a woman. And similarly, man is someone who identifies as a man. Remember when we talked about binary a few slides ago, that two and only two? Non-binary is a gender identity that says, I'm not part of the gender binary. The gender binary is the system of thinking that there are only two genders, man and woman. So non-binary says, okay, I see that man box, I see that woman box. I'm not a man, I'm not a woman, I'm non-binary. I'm not part of that binary gender system. Gender fluid describes someone whose gender is fluid. So that can look lots of different ways. Sometimes someone who's gender fluid might feel more feminine one day, maybe more androgynous the next day, maybe more masculine another day. Their gender is not static, it's dynamic and it's moving and it's fluid. And we're going to come back to genderqueer in a few moments once we've talked about the word queer. So those are some gender identities. Important to remember, a gender identity is one's internal sense of who you are. All right. So what's the connection between sex assigned at birth and gender identity? Two more words have popped up on the screen. I'm going to start with cisgender. So cis comes from the Latin prefix meaning on the same side of, and cisgender refers to someone whose gender identity is the same as what they were assigned at birth. I'll say that again. Cisgender describes someone whose gender identity, their sense of who they are, is aligned with their sex assigned at birth. So if there's a little baby born out there and the doula says, congratulations, it's a girl or it's a female, and this girl grows up to know herself as a girl and then as a woman, she is a cisgender woman because her gender identity, woman or girl, is aligned with what she was assigned at birth. Transgender, on the other hand, describes someone whose gender identity does not align with what they were assigned at birth. Transgender describes someone whose gender identity is different from what they were assigned at birth. So there's lots of different ways that this can look, and actually trans or transgender is an umbrella category all to itself. But one example, one manifestation of that could look like, let's say there's a little baby born, and the doctor or the doula or the midwife says, "Congratulations, it's a boy," looking between this baby's legs. And this person grows up, has life experiences, gets to know themselves, gets to know the world, right? And actually knows herself to be a girl. She might identify as a transgender girl because her gender identity, girl, is different from what she was assigned at birth. Okay. Cisgender and transgender are adjectives. So we would say a cisgender person or a transgender man, not a cisgender, not transgenders. They are adjectives, not nouns. Right. I'm gonna pause, let folks take that in. All right. We're going to move on to the last corner of this triangle, which is sexual orientation, which is one that folks tend to be a little bit more familiar with. So sexual orientation is who we are attracted to, who we want to share our hearts and or bodies with, whether we experience sexual and romantic attraction. That's all related to sexual orientation. So some words popped up here like bisexual, lesbian, straight, gay, asexual, pansexual, queer. The words that have a bolded first letter, that indicates that that is part of the acronym of LGBTQ. So the L is lesbian, B bisexual, etc. Let's see. Once again, this is not an exhaustive list, not a complete list of all the sexual orientations out there, but I can talk about the ones that are up here. So when we say straight or heterosexual, we're generally talking about men who are attracted to women, women who are attracted primarily to men. Lesbian usually describes women or femme-aligned folks who are primarily attracted to other women or femme-aligned folks. We have gay, which generally describes someone who's attracted to people of the same gender. Bisexual, again, that prefix of bi meaning two. Bisexual describes someone who is attracted to two or more genders. Asexual, the prefix a means without, right? So asexual describes folks who experience little or no sexual attraction to others. Pansexual describes someone who is attracted to people of any gender or all genders. Sometimes pansexual folks will say, I fall in love with the person, not the gender. And then we have the word queer, which is the Q in LGBTQ. Queer is a reclaimed word, meaning if you look it up in the dictionary, it might say something like odd or strange. Some folks in this space might remember a time when this was used primarily as a slur in a derogatory way. When I say reclaimed, what I mean is it has a derogatory history, and some folks, myself included, have taken this word back and put it on ourselves, self-identified in this way, which takes the power out of it for others who might use it against us. Great, I love the thumbs up. Okay, so for example, I identify as queer. So, you know, that is a word that fits for me. I like it because it's vague. Honestly, I like it because it's vague. I guess I haven't defined it for you now. So let me pause and slow my roll. My working definition for you for queer is not straight. That's my working definition for you for queer is not straight. So, you know, that is a little bit vague. That's one of the reasons I like it. It's not super specific. It's not telling you all the nitty gritty of, you know, who I'm attracted to, but it's telling you I'm not straight. Because it's a reclaimed word, sometimes we talk about this word as a yellow light word. So when you're driving along and you see a flashing yellow light, what does that mean? proceed with caution, right? Check out what's going on. You might be good to go. You might need to slow down. You might need to stop. Yellow light. We call this a yellow light word because it does have a history of being a derogatory term. It is a reclaimed word. And so some folks really do not like to be called this. There tends to be an age gap a little bit. So some older folks in the LGBTQ community would not self-identify with the word queer. They might use another word up here like gay or bisexual or some other term. And so this, again, we want to make sure that we are allowing everyone to self-identify with the words that feel right for them. So because I just went ahead and I told you like I'm queer, that's the word I use, you can also use that word to describe me. And that's true pretty much for every word on this slide. We want to use the language that folks have self-identified for themselves. All right. Oh, let me go back. I want to pause. That was a lot of information, potentially a lot of new information. Any burning questions, things that you'd like clarification on, feeling fuzzy? Take a moment, take it in. What questions do we have?
It seems to me like gay is most often used for men who are same gender attracted more than for women.
Yeah,
wrong?
I would say historically gay was only used by men or primarily by men. Today, maybe that might be the case that like more men use that word than folks of other genders, but people of all genders use that word. Yeah. Great question. Any other questions or clarifications? All right.
I'm sorry, I do have a question.
Yes,
What's the difference
great.
between, bisexual and pansexual?
Oh, I love this question. Thank you for asking. All right. So bisexual describes someone who is attracted to two or more genders, and pansexual describes someone who is attracted to any or all genders. So sometimes I think about this like when I go to my local froyo place, you know, those froyo places that have like a million different flavors and you can just like get any combination of flavors of frozen yogurt. So it's a little bit of a silly analogy, but it's like someone who is bisexual in this analogy maybe likes 3 of those flavors. Maybe they like 4 of those flavors. Maybe they like 2 of those flavors, but not all of them. Not all of the like however many flavors there are. There's 2 or 3 or 4, some particular number of flavors that person likes. Someone who's pansexual in this sort of silly ice cream analogy might go in and say, oh yes, I love all the flavors, every single one. I love the flavor. I love all the flavors. So that's the difference. Sometimes folks use this interchangeably. Like sometimes people self-identify as both bisexual and pansexual. Maybe the nitty-gritty doesn't matter so much to them, but that's sort of the technical difference between those terms.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to mention historically, and from what I've seen, bi and pan, I identify as bi myself. Historically, I have like a lot of overlap between them, but the distinction is important to certain people that identify as either or. So it's important to have both, but usually they mean, you can infer that like a great many.
Thanks, Melanie. Yeah, they're both terms that connote multi-gender attraction to multiple genders. It's sort of the nitty-gritty of like how many of those multiple genders.
Thank you.
Right. I'm going to keep us moving. If you think of some more questions, there will be time later as well. All right, so just a few more gender-related terms. Starting in the top left corner, we've already talked about this one, gender identity. There's a picture of a compass in someone's cappy and someone's head. So just a reminder, gender identity is one's internal sense of who you are. So that's why there's a compass in someone's brain, because gender identity lives in your brain, in your heart, in your gut, in your kishkas. It's like internally who you know yourself to be. If you move one picture to the right, in the top right corner, we've got a cute little rainbow collar tie thing with the words gender expression above it. So gender expression is how we express or show our gender to the world. So things like what clothes you wear, what haircut you have, maybe what name you choose to go by, maybe your mannerisms or the way that you speak. Those can all be parts of gender expression. So those sort of external markers, signals, expressions to the world. That's related to gender expression. Bottom left, we have gender roles and stereotypes. So gender roles and stereotypes are, based in different cultures. So they're not universal. Different cultures and societies have different expectations and gender roles and stereotypes. But those are sort of all the archetypes and the boxes and the expectations that are put upon people of different genders. And then finally, in the bottom right, we've got a cutie with a little magnifying glass with the words gender attribution above their face. So gender attribution is what happens when we see somebody on the street or somebody new walks into our office and we make a guess. We see them and we make a guess at what their gender might be. That's gender attribution. That's like the gender we attribute to them. I want to say gender attribution is always a guess, because unless you ask someone, what's your gender? Which, by the way, don't ask anyone what their gender is, or unless somebody tells you what their gender is, you actually don't know, because we can't actually see somebody's gender just by looking at them, right? Because if gender identity lives in the gut and in the heart and in the brain, we can't see that. We can see their gender expression, but that is different sometimes from gender identity. So gender attribution is sort of our best guess when we see somebody, when we attribute a gender to them. I often get stared at by little kids in public. It happens whenever I see a little person in public. There's some really intense eye contact that happens. And my guess, I've never asked these little kiddos, but my guess is that I maybe look a little bit different than what they were expecting. And they're kind of taking that all in, and they're maybe trying to figure me out just by looking. And so that is gender attribution. All right. All right, so take a deep breath. We just learned a lot of terms, a lot of words. Some of those might have been new for folks. Just a reminder to hold on to these terms lightly. We did not even go over an exhaustive list. There's a whole galaxy of identity out there. We used to say like it's a spectrum, right? It's a whole spectrum. And now we're moving away from that language and saying like it's even bigger than a spectrum. It's a galaxy, because a spectrum is also only two-dimensional and it has two ends, and those ends are far from each other, right? But a galaxy is a little bit messier. There's different dimensions, things are different, in different orientations to each other. So it's very, very vast. It's a vast world of gender and sexual orientation that's out there. So if you don't remember every single definition I gave you, that's fine. You're not expected to. And in fact, it's not super useful to memorize every single definition, because this language is also always changing and always evolving to meet the needs of folks in the community. So in 10 years, there might be a really different definition of some of the words that I gave you. So again, hold lightly onto those terms. We don't talk about them so that you can be a walking, talking LGBTQ dictionary or encyclopedia. We go over those terms so we have a common baseline understanding going forward when we're talking about LGBTQ folks. All right. I'm hopeful that if you came in as a 2, maybe you're leaving as a 3. If you came in as a 3, maybe you're leaving as a 4, but it's fine that we're not all leaving as 5s. It's fine that we're not all leaving as experts and mature oaks, right? This is just one presentation and we have the rest of our lives to keep learning. All right. I want to pause and see if there are any other questions on sort of comprehension, terms, and concepts before we move into the arguably more important topic of what to do with this information.
Just, is that term sexual, what do you say, or sex assigned at birth, is that a relatively new term?
Sex assigned at birth, it's not a new term. It's, it's often shortened to sex. Like on a form, when you fill out an insurance form, it's often just shortened to sex, and there's like maybe M or F. It's been a little bit expanded, sex assigned at birth, to drive home the point that, okay, that was a label put on somebody at birth. It may or may not accurately describe them. It's how they were assigned at birth. So it's not a new concept, but the phrasing and sort of expanding it from sex to sex assigned at birth might be new in the last 20-ish years. Yeah. Thanks, Linda. Great question. All right. Let's move on to putting it into practice. So we have a lovely quote from the Talmud. The sages said, study is greater than action, but only because study leads to action. So we want to make sure that we are using this information to make change. We're not just learning it to learn it and to know what all the letters mean. We want to actually put this into practice. So we've got another quote from another very wise source, Ijeoma Oluo, who wrote Let's Talk About Race and my personal favorite, Mediocre, which is a brilliant book. She says, every time you go through something and it's easy for you, look around and say, who is it not easy for? And what can I do to dismantle that system? We're going to be talking about unspoken norms and systems that make it easier for some folks and harder for others. Specifically, we're going to be thinking about these two systems of cis-normativity and heteronormativity. So cis-normativity is about cisgender people, or the cisgender experience. And just as a reminder, cisgender describes someone whose gender identity aligns with what they were assigned at birth. Cis-normativity describes systems that benefit cisgender people and disadvantage trans or transgender people. That's what cis-normativity is. In other words, cis-normativity is sort of the belief that being cisgender is the best and natural and default way of being in the world. Cis-normativity says, sure, maybe there are transgender people out there, but they're really out there. They're on the margins. We're going to center cisgender folks and the cisgender experience. And maybe we'll accommodate, maybe there will be accommodations for non-cisgender people, but we're really going to center the experience of cisgender folks. Similarly, on the right side in yellow, heteronormativity is related to heterosexuality or straightness, right? So that's systems that benefit straight people and disadvantage LGBTQ people. In other words, the way that I generally describe heteronormativity is the belief that being heterosexual is the normal and natural and best way to be. Maybe there are people out there who are not straight, but they're definitely not the norm. And we're gonna really center the norm of heterosexuality. Can I get some examples? I know this feels pretty heady. So to just make it a little bit more concrete, what are some examples that you all know that demonstrate either cis-normativity or heteronormativity?
The male and female restrooms.
Thank you. Yes. So public bathrooms, when there's only two options, women and men, that is a cis-normative system. because where am I supposed to go? I don't have a place to safely go to the bathroom in that case. And there's lots of other people also that wouldn't. So it's saying we are assuming that everybody will feel comfortable with one of these two options. Thank you. Great example. Other examples.
Couples gifts orienting towards men and women, straight marriages, straight relationships, products that you'd find on store shelves.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you are going to get maybe a wedding card, right? It's far more likely that you're going to see Mr. and Mrs. It's going to be, it may, depending on where you are. I'm in Chicago, so maybe it's less hard than up in Kenosha, but it's hard to find a Mrs. and Mrs. or a Mr. and Mr. And then not to even touch on folks who are non-binary who might not use those terms, 100%, or wedding toppers, right? Yeah, they're often men and women. Great, that's heteronormativity. Great, I'm getting some more through a direct message that I'm going to read aloud. Yeah, so insurance forms or many forms that we fill out, there's often only two options for gender or sex, often only two boxes. That leaves out a whole lot of folks. I also got in a private message, clothing in stores. So if you walk into most stores, there's a men's section and there's a women's section, right? That's sending the message that these are the two options. They're so radically different from each other that they need their own different sections, right? Great. Oh, this is a fabulous example. Haircut shops options. So when you go in, like, what are the prices for haircuts? And the thing about that one that is, I love that as an example, is it really just doesn't make sense, right? If you have women's haircuts and men's haircuts, what about men who have long hair? What about women who have short hair? Right? It's really not about the gender at all. So it would make so much more sense to have short hair and long hair, right? As opposed to women's haircut and men's haircut. Yeah, great. I got another direct message, forms for children that ask for details for the father and mother, right? If, you know, for religious school or for school forms, right? It might say mother information and father information. That is wild to me because families look so different, right? Some folks have one parent or more than two parents in the house. Folks might not have a mother and a father. They might have very different sort of makeups in their family, but having that on a form is a very stark example of what is expected. Right? These are fabulous.
The aggressive gendering of children's toys.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we can't just have like a doll section and a truck section, right? We have to have girls' toys and boys' toys. The ways that play kitchens are all pink, right? And play hardware, you know, little kids like hardware stations are in like really dark colors, right? There's such a fixation on making sure boys and girls are so different, and even their toys can't be the same. Great. I also got a direct message example of gender reveal parties. So gender reveal parties are a new-ish phenomenon of having a party when somebody maybe has a sonogram and discovers the sex of their baby, and then they like shoot a rocket and it's either pink or blue. It's actually like caused wildfires and like a lot of really ridiculous things. But gender reveal parties are an example of cisnormativity because it's assuming that because we know what private parts, what bits, what genitals this little baby has, that we know what their gender is. And we know that they're gonna love pink and hate blue, or they're only gonna wear blue, right? There's so many sort of options that are limited then. Once we find out what a baby's genitals are, we sort of like often get rid of half of the possibilities for names and half of the possibilities for decor and half of the possibilities for what clothes they're going to wear. Yeah, great. These are awesome examples. Thank you everyone so much. It seems like folks are really sort of grasping this idea of cisnormativity and heteronormativity. Yeah. Oh, somebody just messaged the board game of life. You like have to get married. I remember, this is actually funny, as a little kid when I played the game of life, I was always like, what if I pulled a card that says I have to get married? What if I don't want to get married, right? What if I don't want to have kids, right? So all of these things that are sort of put on folks as the norm, as things that they should or must do. Thank you, everybody. All right. All right, so we're going to take a few moments and talk about language, because that's one of the sort of, I won't say easiest, but most evident way that folks can be affirming to LGBTQ people. Okay, so from Proverbs, life and death are in the power of the tongue. Again, our words are very powerful. So here are some tips for you all. When you're greeting other people, we can avoid ladies and gentlemen, right? Because again, that's saying there's only those two people. Or, you know, if we don't know somebody, saying, hello, ma'am, how can I help you? Or what would you like, sir? If we don't actually know who that person is, we can avoid those gendered terms and use something more neutral. So some examples are, thanks, friends, have a great night. Good morning, folks. Hi, everyone. And for you, can I get you all something? I tend to say y'all a lot. I'm not from the South, but I've just sort of adopted it into my lexicon because it does include everybody. You know, when I'm talking to teachers, I'll say, like, instead of saying good morning, boys and girls, you could say good morning, friends, good morning, students, good morning, explorers, right? Those are all possibilities. All right, so let's talk about pronouns. I brought up pronouns right at the very beginning of this presentation when I introduced myself. Pronouns are a part of speech that we use to refer to someone in the third person. Pronouns are something that someone gets to choose for themselves. So that's not how I was raised to think. I was raised to think that I can look at somebody and know what their pronouns are. Like, look at someone and know if they're a he or a she, basically. I'll invite you to unlearn that with me. I'm continually unlearning that and reminding myself that everyone gets to choose the pronouns that work for them. So because of that, because everyone gets to choose their own pronouns, that's part of the reason that folks may introduce themselves with their pronouns, or why some people have chosen to add their pronouns to their Zoom name here. Because if we can't tell by looking, we can only know if we're told. So some examples of pronouns: she, her, hers, that's a pronoun. He, him, his, that's a pronoun set. They, them, theirs, that is a singular pronoun set. So the babkas, theirs, they created the recipe themselves. This one is for them. For folks who are feeling a little strange about that and saying, Essie, I know English. Like, when I'm describing a group of people, that's when I use they. Like, they is plural. I hear you. I studied English in undergrad. I'm also a bit of a grammar nerd, so I feel you. They, them is used for plural, but it's also used in a singular way. If you're walking down the street and you find a mask, like a face mask, you might think, oh my gosh, someone dropped their mask. They're really going to need this because we need masks everywhere these days. I hope they find it, right? Or, you know, oh, someone left their coat, right? We actually use they, them as a singular pronoun a lot in English. So this is akin to that, but for specific people. So again, like I said, when I introduce myself, my name is Essie, my pronouns are they, them. So if you were talking about me later, you can say, I met this cool person named Essie. They were very bubbly and excited about the topic. They live in Chicago. That would be how you can talk about me. Also, for folks who are feeling like still a little squicky on the grammar piece, I will reassure you that they, them as a singular has been accepted by all the major style guides. It's in the major dictionaries. It was even Merriam-Webster's word of the year a few years ago. And it also has historical precedent of being used by Chaucer, Jane Austen, and Shakespeare, the singular they. So we do have good historical precedent. And then the last two rows on this little chart are some other pronouns, ze, zir, zirs, and ze, here, heres. Those are what we call neo-pronouns. So these are new pronouns. And the way that these pronouns came about is some people wanted pronouns that were a gender neutral pronoun that was not already used in the plural. So for example, when I came out to my mom and I told her, I'm using they, them, theirs pronouns, she said something along the lines of, they, them is already used in English as a plural. It's confusing. If you want a different pronoun, like, make one up. And so people did. And that's where ze, zir comes from and ze, here comes from. They're made up pronouns that are not already used in English in some other way. And there are more pronouns than this. You'll see a little note. It says ... and more. These are some of the more common ones, but there are more pronouns out there. I work with LGBTQ young people, and they've taught me so many new pronouns, which I think is cool and very creative, that folks in the community are finding words that feel good, and they're creating new words, and they're challenging sort of the dictionary that was handed down to them to find affirming terms. All right. I got a private message in other languages too. Yes, there are more than 2 pronouns in other languages as well. All right, so I started talking a little bit about this of why share pronouns. So why did I share my pronouns when I introduced myself? You may have heard other people share their pronouns when they've introduced themselves. You may have noticed in people's email signatures, it's becoming more and more common to have somebody's pronouns. So why do people do that? On the most basic level, it's sort of like sharing your name. It allows others to refer to you correctly. So if I meet someone new, I wouldn't guess their name, right? I wouldn't just look at them and guess what their name is. That would be ridiculous. And I probably wouldn't guess right. Similarly, I don't want to guess somebody's pronouns. So when you share your pronouns, when you introduce yourself, it allows others to refer to you correctly. And it also challenges the assumption that we can guess. And finally, if you're somebody who moves through the world getting called the right pronouns most of the time or all the time, and you share your pronouns, it takes the burden off of people like me to be the only people to share ours. So I'll tell you a little story, which I think drives this point home. I was once in a meeting a few years ago. It was a meeting of Jewish professionals from various different organizations. And the first thing we did was we all introduced ourselves, and we were sort of sitting in a circle and going in order. And everyone was introducing themselves, and they were just sharing their name and the organization they worked for. Nobody was sharing pronouns. And as it was getting closer and closer to me, I thought, oh gosh, no one is including their pronouns. No one's introducing themselves with their pronouns. I don't want to be the only person who shares mine because I use they, them pronouns, right? I don't want to be the only person to share mine. So I guess I'm just not going to share mine. Probably someone's going to, call me the wrong thing later, and it's going to hurt. And I guess I'm just going to accept that in this space. As it was getting closer and closer to me, the person right before me shared her name and her pronouns. And I just let out a sigh of relief. I thought, oh my gosh, okay, someone broke the ice, someone else shared their pronouns, and that made me so much more comfortable to share mine. And that allowed me to show up in the space fully and for people to be able to refer to me properly. So it's a really important sort of allyship move to share pronouns. Oh, look, there's me. So some examples of places that folks share pronouns is, when you just introduce yourself, hi, I'm so-and-so, my pronouns are such and such. In your Zoom name, people sometimes put their pronouns. I'm seeing some folks on this call have their pronouns. In an email signature, we have an example. Rachel Court, who's the executive director of Mishkan here in Chicago, has her pronouns in her signature. Edith, who's the CEO of Keshet's, right, has her pronouns in her bio. Back when we used to have name tags because we were seeing people in person, sometimes people will put their name and their pronouns. So those are just some examples of places that people put theirs. When I'm talking to young people, it's really interesting. I sometimes say, how would you know someone's pronouns? And often the answer I get is they put them in their Instagram bio. So on social media, in people's profiles, wherever folks share their name, more and more folks are sharing pronouns. All right, so still on this topic of pronouns, when mistakes happen, and they will, right? We're all humans and we make mistakes. I sometimes use the wrong pronouns for people. I am not immune, and you also will, right? Because we're humans. Instead of saying how or why the mistake happened, sometimes people say, oh, I'm so sorry, please be patient. It's just so hard for me. I've known you for 10 years as she, and now you want to be he, and it's just so confused, right? People go on and on and on. Instead of all of that, it's as simple as saying, oh, I'm sorry. or thank you, and moving on. So notice that you made a mistake, say sorry or thank you, correct yourself, and move on. So for example, if I were talking about my friend Jenny, and I made a mistake, if I misgender, use the wrong pronoun for Jenny, it could sound something like this. Jenny went to the store to buy her favorite drink. Oh, I'm sorry. Jenny went to the store to buy their favorite drink, and it's Gatorade. Their favorite drink is Gatorade, right? So it's really, really simple. It doesn't have to be a whole long like Yom Kippur type apology. It's like, notice you made a mistake, say sorry, or if someone corrects you, say thank you for the correction, correct yourself and move on.
If I can interject real quick.
Please.
Regarding pronouns and misgendering is something that I and other trans people have noticed is I use she, her pronouns, as well as obviously like a bajillion other people. But and like, I'm not trying to sound like accusatory to anyone. It's just, this is just something that happens and can be like noticed and tackled in real life if you encounter it. If someone uses she, her, he, him, and they are trans, if someone refers to them explicitly as sort of they, them, as like a blanket sort of thing, that's still misgendering. It should be noted, like, if someone looks at me and they know I go by she, her, and they say them, they're not using my pronouns. That's rude.
Yeah.
That's something to be aware of in my eyes.
Thank you, Melanie. Absolutely. Yeah, right. Because inherent in that is maybe that person is uncomfortable with you using she, her pronouns. So it's like, it doesn't matter if that person is uncomfortable. They still need to respect your pronouns and use the pronouns that you're sharing that you want to use. So misgendering, it means using the wrong pronoun for someone, even if that's using a neutral pronoun like they for someone who uses she or someone who uses he. So I really appreciate that. Yeah. Another note about pronouns that I want to make is if somebody that you know and love changes their pronouns, it can be hard. It can be hard when somebody changes their name or changes their pronouns. If you've known them for a long time, the shift is not going to happen overnight for you. It's going to take some time. And I understand that. And something that can make it easier is to practice. So just from my own life, when I have had friends who have changed pronouns, I walk around my house talking to myself or talking to my cats or talking to a friend about that person in the third person. So I'll just go around muttering, like, it doesn't matter what I'm saying, but I'm practicing talking about that person using their new pronouns and noticing when I make a mistake and correcting myself. But it really only will get easier if one practices. So that can be part of the reason why it can be really hard for folks, is if they're not actively practicing or they're not integrating the new pronoun, it's not going to magically happen. It's about building sort of new neural pathways in your brain and making it a habit, and it will get easier, but it does take practice. So that's a little hot tip from me. If somebody in your life does change their pronouns, practice with someone else. Don't practice with that person, because that person doesn't have to catch your mistakes that you will make, right? That's not on that person to do that. But talk to yourself, talk to your cat, talk to another person and say, hey, this person just told me that they changed their pronouns. Can we talk about them for 5 minutes? And every time I make a mistake, will you correct me? Right? That's a very lovely thing to do. And it makes such a difference to those of us who, have changed pronouns in our lives. It makes such a big difference. All right, we're going to close with this beautiful quote that says, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. So we want to sort of just keep in mind that we're working with folks. We should be working with communities, uplifting voices, listening to what what folks are saying, listening to lived experiences and working with them, as opposed to, you know, standing in front and holding the sign saying, I'm an ally, I'm working for LGBTQ equality, when the LGBTQ folks are behind you going, wait, what? You just stepped right in front of me, right? So we want to be working with communities, because our liberation is bound up with each other's, and we cannot be free until we are all free. And then a little Pirkei Avos, because we always need to have some Pirkei Avos. It is not incumbent upon you to complete the work, but nor are you free to desist from it. So we're not all leaving this space and we're going to like end homophobia, right? We're not going to totally tear down the system of cisnormativity after this 90-minute presentation. That's not possible for you to complete the work of LGBTQ liberation. But we do all have a responsibility to be chipping away and to be doing our part and doing what we can to be working towards liberation. All right, some further resources before I take a breath and take some more questions. The Keshet online resource library has so many wonderful resources. The website is keshetonline.org. There's also the youth page that you can check out if you have, you know, LGBTQ plus young folks in your life. There's text studies there. There's inclusion guides. There's some really, really wonderful stuff on the website, so check that out. And also, if you'd like to be in touch with the education and training team, you can email education@keshetonline.org. And with that, I'm going to pause for questions. We did so well on time. We have nearly 10 minutes for questions. While I'm gathering questions, I am going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to put in the link to everybody, a survey link. So Keshet takes survey responses really seriously and reads every response. So if you would like to click on that link and either start filling it out now or, you know, later this evening or tomorrow, that would be so appreciated, so that Keshet can know what's going well, what could be different. So go ahead and click on that link if you'd like. But for the next few minutes, we're open for questions. So what's on folks' mind?
Do you want the questions in the chat or?
Whatever folks are comfortable with. If you'd rather put it in the chat, go for it. But I also saw someone unmute. You can unmute and ask your question aloud. I see maybe Harriet has a question.
How do I put pronouns in my Zoom name?
Great question. If you hover over your picture, you'll see 3 dots, a little ellipsis, and you can hit rename. And then you can put in whatever you want to display there.
Part of the inspiration for this program tonight was that our ritual committee is grappling with whether we should change terms that we use in the synagogue, like bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah, or how we call individuals up to the Torah with their Hebrew names, either as bar or bat. And there are probably other categories that I'm forgetting, but I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that. And maybe there are resources at the Keshet website, but if you could share some thoughts or best practices.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So I will say that this presentation didn't focus on sort of synagogue related policy things, but Keshet has a ton of resources on that. But just off the top of my head, I know congregations who have, you know, started offering, along with the option of having a bar mitzvah and a bat mitzvah, having a b mitzvah or a b'nai mitzvah, or a simchat mitzvah. I did write a resource on Keshet's website for gender neutral b mitzvahs, and it's pretty comprehensive, so you can check that out. And in terms of being called to the Torah for an aliyah, I know of a congregation here in Chicago that has the Gabbai cards, and it has the masculine language and it has the feminine language and it has neutral language, which uses, amongst other things, mi beit, from the house of, instead of bar or bats. And I believe their policy is actually to default to the neutral unless someone specifically asks. So those are some that I know of off the top of my head.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It's maybe a little bit off the point, but oh, here I am. It's a little bit off the point, but it's just something that's been on my mind for the past few days. I've been reading a lot about it, and that's J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter. And, you know, I know that one daughter's a librarian, and she said the library doesn't do any Harry Potter events anymore like they used to. And because J.K. Rowling is such a loud, transphobic person. And I've read some of the things that she said about trans people, and they're horrible. But at the same time, I love Harry Potter. So I just would like to know what your opinion is about that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is very much my opinion. I also love Harry Potter, and I grew up reading those books, listening to those books on tape with my brother, with my family. It holds a very special place in my heart. And so you can imagine how heartbreaking it was the last few years to hear that the author of this thing that I love so much has said some really dangerous and harmful things about my community. In my opinion, I think that I can still derive joy and pleasure from the Harry Potter universe without giving monetarily to J.K. Rowling. So I will no longer buy any copies of the book, right? I might get them out of the library, but I'm not going to give that franchise any more of my money. And I actually did a Talmudic text study last year around this idea of lo bashamayim hi. It is not in the sky. And this was referring, and the rabbi can pipe in here, but it was referring to like the Torah and the halacha and the things that were handed down to the Jewish people. And at one point, like God comes in and tries to say like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. It's actually this way. And the people said, lo bashamayim hi, like you have given us this thing. You have given us this text, this tradition. It's now living in us. We have it. We are creating meaning from it. We are implementing it in our lives. And you, God, actually don't get to come in and start adjusting things and making changes because you handed this down to us. And that's maybe sort of a stretch. I don't know if it's heretical to make this connection with J.K. Rowling, but I think about it in this way of like, you have given this gift that meant a lot to me and other folks, like maybe yourself, and you don't get to take away the joy that has brought me. I can see the problematic parts of it. I can see that you are maybe a person that I really don't agree with and have a lot of trouble with, but it's living in us now, right? It's living in us. And I also take comfort in the fact that I actually think Harry Potter was really life-saving for a lot of queer and trans kids, because for a lot of us, it was actually like an escape from some really hard things in life. And so I feel a little like vindicated in thinking like, oh, J.K. Rowling, like you hate trans people, you've saved so many of our lives. Like, how does it feel in a kind of salty, vindictive way? That's my personal take. I know other folks who feel really differently in terms of the art and the artist, and can we separate them? It's a very complex question. That's my personal take.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
I think we have time for maybe one more question if somebody has one. Or if something was put in the chat.
How do you do that? I can't figure out the pronoun thing. I'm sorry.
Oh,
How do you do that one more time?
David, did you find the rename when you hover over the three dots and you do rename?
On your square, on your
own face. You should be able to. Maybe
I
this
don't
is
think
something.
I don't think it's enabled.
Oh, it could be, you know what? It could be a feature of this Zoom. In most Zooms, you'll be able to click that three dots and hit rename, and then you can type in David and then whatever.
No, you're right. We disabled it because We had
The
some
young people were being
yes.
sassy. Yeah, the
We
young people
found
were
the
being
renamed
sassy.
teacher and they put some things when we
Got
were
it, got it.
on Zoom. But
Okay, so
we're not in Zoom school anymore, so I
Yeah.
could probably redo it.
So in most Zoom meetings, you would be able to do that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all. I want to say thank you all so much. It's been really a pleasure to be with you all and see your faces. And feel free to be in touch. I'll pass it over to the rabbi to just close us out.
I just want to thank you so much, Essie, on behalf of all of us who are here and perhaps people who will watch later on YouTube, because I know there are people who wanted to be here tonight and couldn't be. And I want to say I'm sorry because I think I may have misgendered you when I introduced you. And so I want to say to everybody now that I know you'll all join me in thanking Essie. They taught us a tremendous amount tonight, and we are all better for it. And we can all now go to Keshet website and continue to learn. So thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. Be well.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Good night.
Take care.
Thank you, Essie.
Good night,
Bye.
everybody.